Welcome to episode 65 of the Peak Performance Podcast. I'm Brad Young, and today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating chapters in sports history: the rise of Soviet era athletes who dominated the world stage for decades. From the 1950s through the 1980s, the USSR produced an unprecedented number of Olympic champions, world record holders, and athletic legends whose achievements still echo today. The Iron Curtain's golden age, a system built for dominance. The Soviet sports machine wasn't an accident. It was a meticulously engineered system designed to demonstrate communist superiority on the global stage. While Western athletes trained in garages and local gyms, Soviet competitors had access to state funded research institutes, cutting edge technology, and a scientific approach that was decades ahead of its time. What made the Soviet system so remarkable wasn't just the resources, it was the methodology. Soviet sports scientists treated athletic development like rocket science, breaking down every movement, every energy system, and every recovery protocol into measurable, optimizable components. The numbers don't lie. Olympic medals. Total medals won by Soviet Union from 1952 to 1988, more than any other nation during this period. Gold medals. Olympic golds captured across summer and winter games in just 36 years. World records. Weightlifting world records set by Soviet athletes between 1950 to 1990. These staggering numbers represent more than athletic talent. They reflect a systematic approach to human performance that revolutionized how we think about training, recovery, and peak athletic achievement. The Soviets didn't just produce great athletes, they created a replicable system for excellence. The birth of scientific training. To understand Soviet dominance, we need to go back to the 1950s when Soviet sports scientists began applying principles from physiology, biomechanics, and psychology to athletic training. While Western coaches relied on intuition and tradition, Soviet researchers were conducting thousands of experiments, measuring everything from muscle fiber activation to hormonal responses. Institutes like the All-Union Research Institute of Physical Culture in Moscow became hubs of innovation where scientists and coaches collaborated to unlock human potential. They asked fundamental questions. How do muscles actually grow stronger? What's the optimal ratio of training to recovery? How can we predict and prevent overtraining? Their answers would reshape athletic training forever. Periodization, the Soviet Revolution, a new training paradigm. Perhaps the most significant contribution from Soviet sports science was periodization, the systematic planning of athletic training in cycles. Professor Lev Matveyev pioneered this approach in the 1960s, dividing training into distinct phases with specific goals. Before periodization, athletes often trained the same way year-round, leading to plateaus and burnout. The Soviet system introduced strategic variation, manipulating volume, intensity, and specificity to produce continuous adaptation and peak performance at critical moments. Preparatory phase. Build general fitness foundation with high volume, lower intensity training. Competition phase. Increase intensity, reduce volume, focus on sport specific skills. Transition phase. Active recovery and restoration before starting the next cycle. Powerlifting dominance. Soviet powerlifters became legendary for their strength and technical precision. Names like Vasily Alexev, the first person to clean and jerk 500 pounds, and David Reigert, who set 69 world records, became household names across the globe. But their success wasn't just about raw talent, it was about scientific training principles that anyone can apply. Soviet powerlifters trained with remarkable frequency, often squatting 6 to 8 times per week. This seems counterintuitive to Western training wisdom, which emphasized long recovery periods. But the Soviets understood something crucial. It's not about how much you train, but how you manage fatigue and stimulate adaptation through intelligent programming. Their approach focused on submaximal training, lifting heavy but not maximally heavy most of the time. Instead of constantly testing their 1-rep max, Soviet lifters accumulated massive volumes at 70 to 85% intensity, developing both strength and technical mastery simultaneously. This allowed them to train more frequently without burning out. The Bulgarian versus Soviet approach. Soviet method. Volume emphasis. High training frequency with sub-maximal loads. 70 to 85% intensity. Periodization. Structured phases building toward competition peaks. Technical focus. Perfect form at moderate weights before adding load. Recovery integration. Built-in deload. Weeks in active recovery periods. Bulgarian method. Intensity emphasis. Daily maximum or near maximum attempts, 90 to 100% intensity. Autoregulation. Train to current capacity each day, no fixed programming. Selection bias. Only genetically gifted athletes survive the brutal approach. Limited sustainability. High injury rates and career burnout common. While both systems produced champions, the Soviet approach proved more sustainable and applicable to a broader range of athletes. The Bulgarian method, though effective for elite competitors, broke more athletes than it made. Gymnastics perfection. Technical mastery through repetition. Soviet gymnasts like Olga Korbut, Nadia Comaneci, trained in the Soviet system in Romania, and Larisa Latinina dominated international competition through an obsessive focus on technical perfection. Their training emphasized thousands of repetitions of basic movements before attempting complex skills. The Soviet gymnastics system recognized that elite performance requires neural pathways so ingrained that movements become automatic under pressure. Coaches would have gymnasts perform basic elements hundreds of times daily, far beyond what seemed necessary until perfect execution became effortless. The dark side, pharmaceutical enhancement. Any honest discussion of Soviet athletic dominance must address the systematic use of performance-enhancing drugs. The Soviet sports system pioneered sophisticated doping programs that gave their athletes significant advantages. State-sponsored laboratories developed new compounds and masking agents, staying ahead of testing protocols for decades. Anabolic steroids, testosterone derivatives, and growth hormones were administered under medical supervision to elite athletes across virtually every sport. The program was so extensive that many athletes didn't even know what substances they were taking. Coaches simply told them to take their vitamins. While we can't and shouldn't replicate this aspect of the Soviet system, understanding it provides context for their achievements. The lesson isn't that drugs created their success, but rather that the combination of scientific training, pharmaceutical enhancement, and psychological preparation created a nearly unbeatable formula. For natural athletes today, we can adopt their training principles while maintaining our health and integrity. Anabolic steroids in Soviet sports. Oral turinabol, the preferred compound for Soviet and East German athletes, developed specifically for athletic performance with supposedly reduced detectability, provided steady strength gains with less water retention than other steroids. Testosterone propionate, short ester testosterone used during heavy training phases, cleared the system relatively quickly, making it harder to detect during competition periods, provided rapid strength and recovery benefits. Nandrolone, used for its joint supporting properties and steady muscle building effects, particularly popular among weightlifters dealing with heavy training loads and joint stress from frequent heavy lifting. Cycling protocols. Soviet doctors pioneered sophisticated cycling methods, timing drug use to training phases and using masking agents. Athletes would blast during heavy training blocks and cruise approaching competitions to avoid detection. Electrical muscle stimulation. One of the most innovative technologies employed by Soviet sports scientists was electrical muscle stimulation, EMS. Soviet researchers discovered that applying electrical current to muscles could produce contractions more intense than voluntary effort, leading to unique adaptations. Professor Yakov Kotz pioneered EMS research in the 1970s at the Central Institute of Physical Culture in Moscow. His studies showed that EMS could increase strength by 30 to 40% in just 3 weeks when combined with traditional training. The technique worked by recruiting more motor units simultaneously than voluntary contraction could achieve. Soviet athletes used EMS during recovery periods, allowing them to stimulate muscles without the systemic fatigue of regular training. Weightlifters would apply EMS to their legs the day after heavy squats, promoting recovery while maintaining muscle activation. Sprinters used it to develop explosive power in specific muscle groups without the pounding of track work. Today, EMS technology has become widely available, though most commercial devices are less powerful than those used in Soviet research. Modern athletes can still benefit from EMS for recovery, injury rehabilitation, and supplemental strength work when used properly. Recovery technologies. Sports massage. Soviet athletes received daily massage from trained therapists who understood muscle physiology. Deep tissue work, lymphatic drainage, and targeted trigger point therapy accelerated recovery between training sessions. Contrast therapy. Alternating hot and cold exposure became standard practice. Athletes would move between hot baths, 40 to 42 degrees Celsius, and cold plunges, 10 to 15 degrees Celsius, to stimulate circulation and reduce inflammation. Sauna protocols. Regular sauna sessions enhanced recovery, cardiovascular conditioning, and mental resilience. Soviet athletes used both dry saunas and steam rooms as part of their recovery routines. Autogenic training. A self-hypnosis technique teaching athletes to control physiological responses like heart rate and muscle tension. This mental training enhanced recovery and competition performance. The psychology of Soviet excellence. Physical training was only part of the Soviet system. Sports psychologists worked closely with athletes to develop mental toughness, visualization skills, and competitive mindset. The Soviets recognized that elite performance required mastery over both body and mind. Soviet psychologists developed detailed mental training protocols, including progressive relaxation techniques, competitive anxiety management, and concentration exercises. Athletes spent significant time on mental preparation, treating psychological training with the same seriousness as physical work. One revolutionary technique was DO motor training, mentally rehearsing movements with such intensity that muscles showed measurable electrical activity. Research demonstrated that visualization alone could maintain strength during injury layoffs and improve skill acquisition when combined with physical practice. Soviet athletes would spend hours mentally rehearsing perfect technique, effectively getting extra training without physical fatigue. Monitoring and testing. Soviet coaches obsessively measured everything. While Western athletes trained by feel, Soviet competitors underwent constant testing to track adaptation, prevent overtraining, and optimize programming. This data-driven approach was decades ahead of its time. Heart rate variability. Morning heart rate measurements indicated recovery status. Elevated resting heart rate signaled inadequate recovery and triggered modifications to that day's training intensity or volume. Grip strength testing. Daily grip. Strength measurements provided a simple indicator of nervous system fatigue. Reduced grip strength from baseline indicated systemic fatigue requiring lighter training. Biomechanical analysis. Soviet sport institutes used high-speed video and force plates to analyze movement patterns, identifying technical flaws and efficiency improvements invisible to the naked eye. Blood work. Regular blood testing monitored markers of overtraining, including testosterone to cortisol ratios, creatine kinase levels, and immune function indicators. Training principles you can use. While we can't replicate the full Soviet system, the fund-in, full-time training, pharmaceutical programs, and cutting-edge equipment, we can absolutely apply their fundamental principles. These evidence-based concepts work for natural athletes at any level, from beginners to elite competitors. Principle 1, volume before intensity. Build a foundation with higher volume at moderate intensity before pushing maximum loads. Accumulate quality repetitions to develop both strength and technical proficiency. Principle 2, frequency over duration. Train more often with shorter, focused sessions rather than occasional marathon workouts. Multiple moderate stimulus exposures drive better adaptation than periodic crushing efforts. Principle 3, plan variation. Systematically vary training in variables, volume, intensity, exercise selection across weeks and months. Avoid random programming, make changes deliberately and purposefully. Principle 4, recovery is training. Rest isn't empty time between workouts, it's when adaptation occurs. Prioritize sleep, nutrition, and active recovery with the same seriousness as training sessions. Building your Soviet style training plan. Let's get practical. I'm going to walk you through how to structure a Soviet inspired training program that builds strength, power, and work capacity while remaining sustainable for natural athletes with jobs, families, and lives outside the gym. The foundation. Soviet programs centered on competition lifts and their close variations. For power lifters, this meant squats, bench press, and deadlifts formed the core, supplemented by variations like pause squats, board presses, and deficit pulls. The key principle was specificity with variation. Do movements very similar to your competition lifts, but introduce slight modifications that address technical weaknesses while providing novel stimulus for continued adaptation. Weekly training structure. Soviet powerlifters typically trained 4 to 6 days per week, with each major lift addressed 2 to 3 times weekly. This high frequency allowed them to practice technique constantly while managing fatigue through intelligent load distribution. Monday, squat focus day. Competition squat variation, moderate heavy weight, 4 to 6 sets of 2 to 4 reps. Tuesday, bench press focus. Competition bench or close variation, moderate heavy weight, 4 to 6 sets of 2 to 4 reps. Wednesday, light squat plus accessories. Squat variation at 65 to 75% technique work plus posterior chain assistance. Thursday, deadlift focus. Competition deadlift or variation, moderate heavy weight, 3 to 5 sets of 1 to 3 reps. Friday, bench volume. Bench variation at 70 to 80%, higher reps, 5 to 8, plus upper body accessories. Saturday, squat deadlift technique. Light technical work on both lifts, 60 to 70%, focus on movement quality. The 12-week periodized plan. Here's how to structure a complete training cycle using Soviet periodization principles. This progression builds from higher volume work to peaked intensity, culminating in competition-ready strength. Notice how intensity gradually increases as volume decreases. Week 12 is a deload week, preparing you for either testing your maxes or entering competition. This wave loading pattern prevents overtraining while steadily building strength. Sample training week, accumulation phase. Let's detail what an actual training week looks like during the high volume accumulation phase, weeks 1 to 4. These sessions emphasize volume and technical practice over maximum intensity. Monday, lower power. Competition squat, 5x5 at 75%. Pause squat, 3x3 at 65%. Romanian deadlift, 4x8. Leg curls, 3x12. Ab wheel, 3x10. Tuesday, upper power. Competition bench, 5x5 at 75%. Close grip. Bench, 3x6 at 70%. Barbell rows, 4x8. Face pulls, 3x15. Tricep extensions, 3x12. Wednesday, lower technique. Front squat, 4x6 at 70%. Deadlift from deficit, 3x5 at 65%. Bulgarian split squat, 3x8 per leg. Back extensions, 3x15. Plank variations, 3x45 seconds. Thursday, pull focus. Competition deadlift, 5x3 at 78%. Deficit deadlift, 3 by 5 at 65%. Good mornings, 3 times 10. Leg curls, 4 by 10. Farmer's walks, 3 by 40 meters. Friday, upper volume. Bench press, wide grip, 4 by 8 at 70%. Incline press, 3 by 10. Weighted pull-ups, 4 by 6. Overhead press, 3 by 8. Dumbbell rows, 3 by 12. Saturday, technique. Squat paused, 4 by 4 at 65%. Deadlift, touch and go, 4 by 4 at 65%. Hip thrusts, 3 by 12. Core circuit, 15 minutes. Mobility work, 20 minutes. Intensity phase adjustments. As you progress into the intensity phase, weeks 9 to 11, the training shifts dramatically. Volume drops, intensity rises, and specificity increases. You're no longer building, you're sharpening what you've built. What changes? Working sets drop from 5 to 6 to 3 to 4 per exercise. Reps per set decrease from 5 to 8 to 1 to 3. Rest periods extend from 3 minutes to 5+ minutes. Exercise variety narrows to competition lifts and very close variations. Assistance work reduces by roughly 50%. Training days may reduce to 4 to 5 per week. Sample intensity day. Monday, heavy squat day. Competition squat. Work up to heavy single at 92 to 95%. A back offset, 3 times 2 at 85%. Pause squat, 3 times 2 at 75%. Romanian deadlift, 3 by 6, moderate. Abs, 2 sets only. Total volume is much lower, but intensity is significantly higher. The heavy single provides neural adaptation without accumulating fatigue. The Soviet diet philosophy. Soviet athletes ate to fuel performance, not for aesthetics. Their nutrition approach prioritized adequate energy, high protein intake, micronutrient density, and meal timing around training. While they didn't count macros obsessively, they followed consistent eating patterns that supported intense training loads. The typical Soviet athlete consumed 3,500 to 5,000 calories daily, depending on body weight and training volume. Protein intake was approximately 1.2 to 1.6 grams per pound of body weight, high by general standards, but moderate compared to modern bodybuilding protocols. Carbohydrates fueled intense training with emphasis on whole grains, potatoes, and vegetables rather than processed sugars. Interestingly, Soviet nutritionists recognized the importance of dietary fat decades before it became mainstream in the West. Athletes consumed ample amounts of butter, whole milk, eggs, and fatty fish, providing both energy and fat-soluble vitamins crucial for hormone production and recovery. Daily nutrition template for strength athletes. Breakfast, 7 a.m., 4 to 6 whole eggs, oatmeal with berries, whole milk coffee. Purpose: break overnight fast, provide sustained energy, support muscle protein synthesis. Mid-morning, 10 a.m., Greek yogurt, mixed nuts, apple or banana. Purpose: maintain blood sugar, prevent catabolism, provide steady amino acid supply. Lunch, 1 p.m., 8 ounces meat or fish, 2 cups rice or potatoes, large salad, olive oil. Purpose: major protein feeding, replenish glycogen, provide micronutrients. Pre-training, 3:30 p.m., rice cakes with honey, whey protein shake, banana. Purpose: rapidly digestible carbs and protein for workout fuel. Post-training, 6 p.m., whey protein shake, white rice or pasta, fruit. Purpose: rapid nutrient delivery, glycogen replenishment, recovery initiation. Dinner, 8 p.m., 8 ounces of meat, potatoes or rice, cooked vegetables, butter. Purpose: final major protein feeding, provide overnight amino acids. Before bed, 10:30 p.m., cottage cheese or casein protein, handful of nuts. Purpose: slow release protein during sleep, prevent muscle breakdown. Macro breakdown for different body weights. The nutritional strategies employed by Soviet athletes during the 1950s to 1980s were meticulously planned to support their rigorous training regimens. While exact details varied depending on the sport and athlete, the macro breakdown for body weight categories typically adhered to the following ratios: protein, approximately 25 to 30% of total caloric intake. Protein was prioritized to support muscle repair and growth, with popular sources including meat, fish, eggs, and dairy products. Carbohydrates, around 50 to 60% of total calories. Carbohydrates were the primary energy source, especially for endurance and power focused sports, with foods like grains, bread, potatoes, and fruits being staples. Fats, roughly 15 to 20% of total calories. Healthy fats were incorporated to ensure energy reserves and hormonal balance, often sourced from animal fats, butter, and nuts. These ratios were adjusted based on the demands of the sport, with endurance athletes often consuming higher carbohydrates and strength athletes focusing more on protein for recovery. Additionally, nutrient timing and portion control were key elements of their dietary regime to optimize performance and recovery. These ranges assume you're training intensely 4 to 6 days per week. On rest days, you might reduce carbohydrates by 20 to 30% while maintaining protein and fat intake. The higher end of each range supports heavier training volumes. The lower end works during intensity focused phases. Essential recovery protocols. Soviet coaches understood that training was just the stimulus. Recovery is where adaptation occurs. They implemented comprehensive recovery protocols that modern athletes often neglect in favor of more training. Sleep optimization, 8 to 10 hours nightly with consistent bed wake times. Soviet athletes often took 30 to 60-minute afternoon naps on heavy training days. Sleep was treated as non negotiable training time. Active recovery days. Light activities like swimming, walking, or cycling at 40 to 60% max heart rate. These sessions enhance blood flow without creating training stress, accelerating recovery. Manual therapy. Regular sports massage 2 to 3 times weekly, targeting muscles under highest stress. Deep tissue work, myofascial release, and trigger point therapy all reduce tension and enhance recovery. Hydration status. Minimum 1 gallon of water daily, more during heavy training. Proper hydration affects every recovery process, from nutrient transport to waste removal. Weekly recovery schedule. Recovery isn't passive, it's active and planned. Here's how to structure recovery interventions throughout your training week to maximize adaptation while preventing overtraining. Sunday evening. Contrast shower, 3 rounds hot cold, light stretching, meal prep for the week, early bedtime, aim for 9+ hours sleep. Monday post training. Post workout nutrition immediately 15 minutes. Foam rolling, compression garments for 2 hours, target 8+ hours sleep. Tuesday evening. 20-minute sauna session or hot bath with Epsom salts, gentle stretching routine, relaxation techniques before bed. Wednesday morning. Check morning. RV and resting heart rate, adjust day's training intensity based on recovery markers. Thursday post training. Cold plunge or ice bath, 10 to 15 minutes. Post workout meal within 60 minutes. Evening walk for active recovery. Friday evening. Professional massage or self-myofascial release. Contrast therapy, prepare for weekend recovery focus. Saturday post training. Light technique work, extensive mobility session, 30+ minutes. Plan Sunday as complete active rest. Implementing EMS technology. Modern application of Soviet innovation. While Soviet athletes had access to medical grade EMS devices, today's athletes can benefit from consumer grade units when used correctly. The key is understanding that EMS is supplementary to training, not a replacement for it. Use EMS during recovery days to maintain muscle activation without systemic fatigue. Apply it to muscles that respond well to high frequency training like calves, abs, and forearms. A typical session lasts 20 to 30 minutes per muscle group with intensity set to produce strong but comfortable contractions. Safety note: never use EMS if you have a pacemaker, are pregnant, or have neurological conditions. Start with low intensity and gradually increase. EMS should create visible muscle contractions but never be painful. Mental training. Protocols: physical preparation without mental training leaves performance on the table. Soviet sports psychologists developed specific techniques that gave their athletes psychological advantages as significant as their physical preparation. Pre training. Mental prep. 5 minutes visualization of perfect technique before each session. During training focus. Complete attention on each rep, mental cues for movement quality. Post training review. Mental replay of successful lifts, noting technical improvements. Evening visualization. 15 minutes of detailed mental rehearsal before sleep. Competition simulation. Weekly practice of competition day routines and pressure scenarios. Consistent mental training creates neural pathways that improve actual performance. Athletes who visualize perfect technique daily show measurable improvements in skill acquisition and retention compared to those who only do physical practice. Autogenic training for athletes. Autogenic training was perhaps the most powerful psychological tool in the Soviet arsenal. This self-hypnosis technique allows athletes to consciously control normally involuntary physiological processes like heart rate, muscle tension, and stress responses. Heaviness phase. Lie comfortably, repeat, "My right arm is heavy," until you feel genuine heaviness. Progress through all limbs. This induces deep muscular relaxation. Warmth phase. After mastering heaviness, add warmth. "My right arm is warm." This dilates blood vessels and enhances circulation to muscles. Heart regulation. Focus on your heartbeat. "My heartbeat is calm and regular." Learn to consciously slow your heart rate through mental focus. Breathing control. Observe breathing. "My breathing is calm and effortless." Establish deep rhythmic breathing patterns that reduce anxiety. Performance state. Once basics are mastered, use autogenic training before competition to achieve optimal arousal and focus while managing pre-competition anxiety. Practice autogenic training daily for 10 to 15 minutes. Within 2 to 3 months, you'll develop the ability to enter a relaxed, focused state on command. Invaluable for competition day. Monitoring your progress. The Soviet approach emphasized objective measurement over subjective feelings. Modern technology makes comprehensive tracking easier than ever. Here are the key metrics to monitor throughout your training cycle. Notice the deload in week 4, allowing recovery to rebound. This wave loading pattern, push hard, back off, push harder, drives continuous progress while preventing overtraining. Common mistakes to avoid. Even with perfect programming, certain errors can derail your progress. Soviet coaches identified these pitfalls through decades of experience training thousands of athletes. Avoid these mistakes to maximize your results. Mistake number 1, testing too often. Constantly testing your 1 rep max creates fatigue without driving adaptation. Soviet athletes might test maxes only 2 to 3 times yearly. Trust the process. Test infrequently, train consistently. Mistake number 2, ignoring technique. Chasing numbers with degraded form builds bad habits and increases injury risk. Soviet coaches would reduce weights if technique deteriorated. Perfect practice creates perfect performance. Mistake number 3, insufficient recovery. You can't train harder than you can recover from. Soviet athletes slept 9 to 10 hours nightly and took naps. If you're training intensely on 6 hours sleep, you're fighting a losing battle. Mistake number 4, random programming. Changing exercises constantly prevents mastery and makes progress impossible to track. Stick with core movements for entire training blocks. Variation is good, random chaos is not. Mistake number 5, neglecting nutrition. You cannot outtrain a poor diet. Soviet athletes ate to fuel performance, consuming adequate protein and calories. Trying to gain strength in a significant caloric deficit rarely works. Mistake number 6, ego lifting. Training is practice, not performance. Leave your ego at the door. Use weights that allow quality repetitions with excellent technique. Submaximal training builds maximal strength. Adapting Soviet methods for natural athletes. The elephant in the room. Soviet athletes use performance enhancing drugs, and you probably don't. This requires some adjustments to make their system work for natural lifters who must be more conservative with volume and recovery. Key modifications: reduce frequency. Where Soviet lifters might squat 6 times weekly, natural athletes do better with 3 to 4 sessions. Enhanced recovery from drugs allowed higher frequencies that natural athletes can't sustain. Lower volume per session cut working sets by approximately 20 to 30% compared to classic Soviet programs. A natural athlete does 3 to 4 working sets where the Soviets did 5 to 6. Longer recovery phases. Plan deload weeks every 3 to 4 weeks instead of every 4 to 6 weeks. Natural recovery is slower, requiring more frequent intensity reductions. What stays the same? Periodization structure. The basic wave loading pattern of accumulation, intensification, and realization phases works identically for natural athletes. Technical focus, emphasis on perfect form and submaximal training remains crucial. Natural athletes benefit even more from quality over quantity. Recovery emphasis. All the recovery protocols, sleep, nutrition, stress management become even more important when training naturally. The legacy lives on. The Soviet sports system collapsed with the USSR in 1991, but its scientific contributions transformed athletic training forever. Modern strength and conditioning, whether you're training for powerlifting, Olympic lifting, or general fitness, owes an enormous debt to Soviet researchers and coaches. Today's most successful strength programs, from West Side Barbell to many Olympic weightlifting systems, incorporate Soviet principles. Periodization, submaximal training, high frequency work, and emphasis on technical mastery all trace back to Soviet innovations. Even as training science continues evolving, these fundamental principles remain remarkably relevant. The genius of the Soviet system wasn't just the resources or even the pharmaceutical programs, it was the scientific mindset. Soviet coaches treated training as a problem to be solved through systematic experimentation and objective measurement. That approach, more than any specific program or drug protocol, explains their sustained dominance across multiple decades and dozens of sports. Your action plan. We've covered a lot of ground today, from historical context to specific training programs, nutrition protocols, and recovery strategies. Let me give you a concrete action plan to implement Soviet training principles starting this week. Week 1. Assessment. Test your current maxes, establish baseline measurements, calculate training percentages, and set up your training log. Don't skip this foundation. Week 2 to 4. Accumulation. Begin the high volume phase using the training template provided. Focus on technique, build work capacity, establish consistency with nutrition and recovery protocols. Week 5. Deload. Reduce volume by 40 to 50%, maintain intensity at 60 to 70%, focus on recovery modalities, catch up on sleep, let adaptation occur. Week 6 to 8, continued accumulation. Increase training weights by 2.5 to 5%, maintain high volume approach, refine technique under moderate loads, monitor recovery markers. Week 9, deload. Another recovery week preparing for intensification phase. Reduce volume, maintain moderate intensity, prioritize recovery. Week 10 to 12. Intensification. Shift to intensity phase programming, work up to heavy singles, reduce volume significantly, sharpen technical precision under heavy loads. Week 13. Realization. Test week or competition. Light technical work early in week. Test maxes on fresh legs. Celebrate your progress and learnings. Final thoughts on Soviet training. The Soviet sports system represents one of history's most successful applications of science to human performance. While we can't and shouldn't replicate everything they did, particularly the pharmaceutical programs, their fundamental training principles remain as valid today as when Professor Matveyev first developed periodization theory in the 1960s. Key takeaways. Periodize your training with planned variation in volume and intensity. Train frequently with submaximal loads to build both strength and technique. Prioritize recovery as seriously as training itself. Monitor your progress objectively through consistent testing and measurement. Be patient with the process. Strength is built in months and years, not days and weeks. The most important lesson from Soviet sports science isn't found in any specific programs or protocol. It's the mindset of systematic scientific training. Approach your training like a research project. Make hypotheses, test them rigorously, measure results objectively, and adjust based on data rather than feelings. This evidence-based approach combined with unwavering consistency and intelligent hard work is how Soviet athletes became legendary. It's how modern champions train today. And it's how you can achieve your peak performance potential, whatever your goals may be. Thank you for listening. That wraps up episode 65 of the Peak Performance Podcast. I hope this deep dive into Soviet sports science has given you practical tools to improve your training while appreciating the fascinating history behind modern strength training. Save this episode. Bookmark this episode as a reference guide. The training templates, nutrition plans, and recovery protocols are designed for repeated use as you progress through training cycles. Share your journey. If you implement these Soviet training principles, I want to hear about your results. Share your experiences and ask questions, and connect with other listeners pursuing peak performance. Leave a review. If you found this episode valuable, please leave a rating and review. It helps other athletes discover evidence-based training information. Remember, training is a marathon, not a sprint. The Soviet athletes who dominated their sports for decades didn't get there through shortcuts or quick fixes. They achieved greatness through intelligent programming, consistent effort, and patience with the process. Until next time, train smart, recover hard, and always be learning. This is Brad Young, reminding you that peak performance is built one workout, one meal, one night of sleep at a time.